You're listening to The Adventuring Party, talking about gaming the Irish way. Cade Mila Vulture, you son of a gun.
Welcome to the party. I'm Dave.
I'm Liam.
And I'm Warlord Scar. And I'm going to be on this battlefield forever. I'll never die, and I'll definitely never depreciate in value. Topic we've sort of broached before. A little bit of gamer psychology I like to call infinite play, where you invest your not insubstantial money in a piece of gaming, and you convince yourself it's going to be worth it because you're going to be playing it for years. You're going to extract so much value, so much playtime out of everything you buy. But that's not. I mean, it's not never a lie, but it does seem like. I feel like a lot more things have a finite lifetime than maybe people give them credit for. I know one situation which comes up a lot is board games, and Liam, that's one of your things. Would you say, how many of your board games would you say you get more than 10 plays out of?
Quite a few of them, actually. Probably most of them, and that's also partially down to the fact that I haven't bought a board game other than Frosthaven. Actually, that's a lie. I was on my holidays recently. I bought a pile of games. I would say there are a few board games I have that I have not played 10 times. Brass is probably one of them. Watson and Holmes. I'm just literally looking at my shelf here.
Yeah.
Pulsar 2849. So it's the majority of my games I've played more than 10 times or more. Some of the long playtime ones now, I've gotten older, family life and all gets in the way. You can't just sit around playing board games of a Saturday for 8 hours.
Yeah. And I'm sure there are lots of people. I'm sure there's one that you've bought like 10, 20 years ago that you still get some play out of. Carcassonne or Settlers of Catan.
I think partially why it is that now I am conscious of my lifestyle, and I'm conscious of the games I will get to play. So those are the games that I pick up, rather than not too distant past, a new version of Twilight Imperium came out, and I was like, ooh, but I was like, I'll never ever get to play that.
Yeah. You get this certain amount of aspirational gaming, which I think also feeds into the mindset.
Mysterium's fine. That's the last game I played. I played a lot of. I was on my holidays with my wife's extended family and lots of teenage kids and my brothers-in-law and stuff. And we played Mysterium, and that's not really my bag. It's not my preferred game. It was still fun. So I'm aware that I will pick up a game like Mysterium, even though it's not really my bag, because it's a game I'll get to play. And even playing a game that isn't 100% for me is still better than, not playing a game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you find that you're as a big board gamer, you do get enough value, but like there's still a whole bunch of stuff which feels like it's very occasional that you get out. And
I guess one thing that gives a longevity. So I guess, in terms of like playing the same thing all the time, if there's no kind of legacy mechanic in it, then yeah, that could be okay. Really, you're just relying on whether that game gets stale for the people who play it. And some people go on, like some people play Diplomacy all of the time, and that's what they play all of the time. They just have the same groups. Anything that is any kind of legacy thing, and this is one of the big things that I think stops RPG play being the only thing you play is this one RPG, is because, or at least the one campaign of an RPG, is that anything where there's any kind of progression or any kind of change happening, it's always going to put a limit on it.
Yeah. I suppose we'll get to RPGs and the various attempts to make them also infinite that never seem to go anywhere. But then But yeah, like if you're 60, 70, 80 euro board game, that's €8 for a night of entertainment, which is a pretty good rate.
Especially if you got like 4 players, you know?
Yeah. It like if you can get a decent amount of play out of it, I think it's worth the money, as you might
It's the
say.
price of a bus into town. Never mind the movie.
Yeah, or the beer after,
or the bus home.
Yeah, and yeah, that's all very true. But we don't when we're buying a thing, we tend not to think that way. We're imagining the endless nights of playing it forever, which don't materialize in the end for a lot of things. Let's say we get the sort of like exponential curve of like the games which are easiest to play see the most play, and then there's big aspirational games, some of the sort like Twilight Imperium, that don't get play. And I do think the rise of the legacy board game is very interesting in this, because it's you're creating a board game experience that's deliberately, tied into that life cycle, that realistic thing of, all right,
Has that petered off a bit?
it has a little, but not entirely. As I say, Frosthaven was that last year?
Yeah, I'm currently playing it.
Yeah.
Never played with Gemini. It's terrible. It was also
Kinda-
just that, like, even the big publishers were jumping on it. Like even not WotC, Hasbro had Betrayal Legacy, which also was a little suspect. But it did seem like there was a lot of legacy games out all of a sudden. So I don't know if you could say it was last year or a couple of years ago.
Yeah, but I do. It might be over the next thing, but I do think it was an interesting experiment in like creating a board game specifically to take part of that value. Like instead of say, oh, we'll play it 1,000,000 times and then we'll play it 3 times. This is a board game which is like, okay, you're going to play this 12 times and then it's done. The board is covered in stickers. You've opened all the little boxes. Half the world's been nuked. We can now definitely just say this board game is done. We've had a complete experience. And I find that interesting.
Well, I suppose it's more direct in terms of you're paying to get this much entertainment.
And
a lot of people were quite opposed to it because it was like, well, I'm taking this thing, I'm paying a premium, because if you could say Pandemic Legacy to a regular game Pandemic Legacy was easily twice the price of Pandemic, possibly even more, but you're literally only going to get to play it between 10 and 20 times. I think people were quite opposed to that.
Yeah, because they imagine them in a situation where, we can play Pandemic 10 times as much as I play Pandemic, obviously. But
also a little bit of a shift, because if you looked at, like, one of the great things with board games is, okay, most games have kind of an ideal number of players, but usually they have a bit of a variable number of players. It might be that the game's good for 3 to 5.
Yeah.
Like if you're playing Pandemic, it's a 4-player game. It's up to 4 players, but you can easily play it with 3. You can't play with 2, but it's not great with 2. Board games, part of the good thing with board games is if you got a player missing, it's not that big a deal. You're having a board games night and Jimmy Jojo doesn't turn up. Okay, that's fine. You play with one less player. But if you're tied into a legacy game, you don't really want to be missing a player, even if the game supports having one player missing of a night. You don't really want them to miss out on it. You don't really. So it's nearly like the same thing when a player is missing from an RPG table, that you've now brought that into board gaming.
And yeah, it is true. I'm just wondering, like, how is it's one of those things where it's a feelings problems, which are one of those problems which technically aren't a problem, but very much because people believe they're a problem, they are a problem. So and that's a lot of this discussion of like, for most people who never play they never play all the board games their shelves more than 3 or 4 times. Not having a game with a limited number of plays that really requires you to get everyone over to play it properly. That seems that seems in it. I'm not sure it really pans out to really be a problem. And if at the end you have a change board that's personal to you, brings up all these theoretical problems versus the practical problems or practical advantages. It's I don't know. It's hard to say. Feelings are real in people's heads, so if it feels off-putting, it becomes off-putting. Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, yes, I mean, feelings are always tricky, but like, I think that's that. A lot of that with legacy board games was like just a barrier, and once people kind of got into it, it was okay. And if it works, it works. And certainly my feeling from having played a few legacy games is like the legacy element in Frosthaven very much works. Very much worked in the pandemic games I played. Didn't really work in Betrayal, but I think that's just because I don't think Betrayal was very good. It was generally a case of when the twist happens, who's the highest stats, right, you win.
Yeah, but that's a classic problem with Betrayal.
Yeah, I think that's just that the mechanics of Betrayal are very old and they didn't update them, and you could tell it creaked big time.
Mm-hmm.
So are we happy with board games? We want to move on to, I mean, what keeps card games fresh?
Well, card games have this wonderful thing called releasing new product every goddamn minute. That seems to be working out.
The IT world, planned obsolescence.
Yeah. The main thing with card games is this is a problem that not every card game cracks, and a lot of them have to lean on their popularity to maintain what people could perceive as having to buy new cards constantly to keep up. I get the impression this is how Yu-Gi-Oh and Pokemon have been keeping things going by just constantly churning sets and having more and bigger, high risk, high power cards.
That's a tight approach.
Yeah, that's certainly the vibe I've been getting from them. Magic has the advantage of certain rotating formats, particularly their standard thing. But they also have an awful lot of non-rotating formats, and those ones are where you see big complaints about power creep. Like one of their most popular formats is Modern, which is like every card in the last, I want to say, 12 years or something, since like the second Ravnica set or something like that. And recently they started printing sets specifically for that and not allowed in the standard setting. And they basically deliberately printed a whole bunch of high-powered cards because they said, "Oh, it's going into a high-power environment, so it's going to be fine." And each time they brought forward one of the sets, there's a big upset in Modern. Everything changes, and now people say, "Well, that's sort of like formatting." And now all those cards that I invested in, 5 years ago, those are obsolete, and the standard players who feel they have to invest new cards every year, feel a little hard done by, because now you're listening to their complaints. So,
it's high risk, high reward, I guess, for the card manufacturers, because either it pays off and people may have to have multiple decks now for the multiple different formats, or else people go, sod this.
Magic has gotten used to people at the tournament level play have gotten used to the constant rotation of cards, and people on the casual end of things have been used to, they're bringing out new stuff. Well, I'll buy a couple packs. Where I think the infinite play mindset really took hold was, as in a recent episode, the Commander set, where almost every card that's ever been in the game is legal, and therefore people, particularly people like me, bring out some really old cards out of their deep storage binders to make decks out of, while newer players can get the terrible precons that they constantly bring out for every set.
And would they be competitive, or is it just that they would have a strange interaction that maybe they couldn't? Because one of the things I would say with the modern that you're saying is they really have to consider the cards of the last 5 years and how they interact with current cards. But if you're talking about every card ever printed, I mean, how long's Magic been going on now? 20 years?
Just at the 30th anniversary.
30. Wow.
I feel like there was a contingent of people in this sort of multiplayer commander format who were saying, well, this is where I play my old jank cards, and they'll be great, they'll do fine. Spells that we thought were really cool, well, they've reprinted 3 new versions in recent sets that seem to be just for making commander players happier, and now my old cards are no good, blah 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 blah. So now they're feeling that their investments, quote unquote, and we can get, I don't know if we want to do an episode on investing in Magic. I would, as a Magic player, I would highly recommend not trying to do that.
It seems speculative where, anyway, probably a whole episode to talk about it, yeah.
Yeah, but there's still this idea where, it's a sort of conflict of people whose expectation is new cards are going to be coming constantly. The part of the game is to constantly be cycling through cards. Old cards may not necessarily be obsolete, but they probably only going to be useful some of the time, and so on, so forth. But then there's the people who haven't expected the more, I would like to play with the cards I bought. People who are going to feel more frustrated if, in the natural process of things, power levels go up, or more streamlined versions of old complicated cards they had arrive.
I guess that would probably be a big detraction to constant play is the arms race that's there, the having to keep up and having to keep buying stuff.
Yeah,
that to me would be a big impediment to constant play. And I think it's probably why I never really got into CCGs. Like I played for a handful of different games. I played sealed drafts, and I've quite enjoyed them just in terms of the mechanic and putting your deck together and all. But I've never liked having to buy a pile of stuff and not knowing what you're buying, and you could get complete junk in your deck. It's not appealed to me. I think specifically because of that element.
Yeah, and that's, I think, why CCGs tend to have, compared to other types of gaming, tend to have very high churn rates, where people just say, right, I've spent too much on this, I'm going to drop out, going to stop playing. And just because maybe they stop buying cards doesn't necessarily mean they stop playing. You see an awful lot of people, like, they try doing Commander, or they try other, let's say, not buying cards friendly ways of playing a game. I know a big one recently, now that people are saying that Commander's gotten all commercial, a big alternative that's shown up is what's called cube drafts, where people take their old collections and put them into booster packs style layouts, and just hand them out to their friends, and they do something like akin to a booster draft with their cube of cards. I know there's a reason it's called a cube, but I can't remember them off the top of my head. And then you just go through the process of picking cards from each pack and passing them along, then taking your pile of cards, turning them into a deck, and having an evening's play with them. And that's an attempt to create that sort of infinite play system with.
Yeah, I know my friends from college, like they used to play a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh, and every now and again we get together once a quarter, play poker, and sometimes they'll be like, "Hey, bring your Yu-Gi-Oh cards, and we'll have a game before everybody turns up." Because you know yourself, people.
Yeah.
Everybody gets to get together for this poker game at around 9 o'clock, and people flow in from 8 o'clock on. So they still play with it. I don't think either of them have bought a Yu-Gi-Oh card, a Yu-Gi-Oh pack in at least a decade. But they still play with their old cards in college.
Yeah. So again, infinite play is an aspiration for the players, but very much for the designers of the game. They're more focused on not necessarily the play career of a given player, but on the having a constant stream of players in and out as they change up the game with every expansion, and make sure the game is healthy with a healthy flat flow new cards. But an individual user probably has a moment where they just say, right, I'm going to stop now. And that's absolutely fine for both, but it is, just a consequence of this is like an individual person cannot necessarily play the same game forever, but a game that can be designed so that the game itself keeps going year on year.
What also comes to mind is whether or not you feel you've gotten your money's worth from a game. There can be a time to cut losses, as in this isn't what I expected, or this just isn't very good, and I could spend my time better.
I felt like that last week when I watched the first episode of that TV show Peacemaker, and a half an hour in, I just went, no.
Yeah.
I don't recall the last time I had that with a board game, but yeah, it's definitely a case that you do need to recognize when you're flogging a dead horse.
Well, we're 25 minutes in, so we should probably bring up RPGs at some point.
The elephant in the room.
Yeah.
I mean, you can have a campaign that goes on for decades.
You very much need to have rule sets that support that, because like outside of some games like Ars Magica has defined time frame that goes on, and it makes no attempt at balance. You have spring covenants that are just starting out. You got winter covenants that are very much in decline, and that passage of time is an intrinsic part of the game. Outside of games like that, which are rare enough, if you have any kind of progression, it's going to put a definite timestamp on your game, because your characters in any of the D20 based games, your character's got to play level 20. What you do? I'm on the final book of the Enemy Within campaign, having played through the starter set, and every fight's like rocket tag. It's the PCs are just crazy powerful, and the book does suggest, oh well, here's things you could do after the game. There's stuff going on down the Badlands. You could probably go, take out an orc warlord or something, or do this or do that. And I'm like, honestly, I don't see how you could continue your game from this point, because already the players have nearly broken the system. So I don't see how you could continue.
Yeah. When you look at a game and you look at your leveling up table or what have you, or you look at the high level edges or and like there's a certain drive in it that's aspirational. Also, like, at level 20 I'll get +4 strength, +4 convention. Well, I'm definitely going to get to level 20.
Fun to think about.
Yeah, that kind of aspirational goal. Oh, I'm going to be the one who gets the +5 Holy Avenger, or I'm going to be the one who casts Wish and wishes away all evil, or all sorts of things like that. Those are all realistic aspirations, but mechanically, there's big problems with it. The time required in most games to get there is a lot. Now, I mean, okay, so let's put aside the idea of like, is your play group going to survive long enough to get to these high levels? Because that's a separate thing we've done episodes on previously. But as again, fellow party member Owen has pointed out, a lot of games break down past their sweet spot levels. Level 10 is one that often comes up in a lot of D&D likes. Is like once you hit level 10, things start to get a bit ropey as, higher level spells, multiple attacks, other silly abilities. The rogue stops being able to roll less than an 11, all this kind of stuff. And it becomes increasingly more difficult to sustain satisfying play, even if technically, there's level 13 bad guys in the monster manual. I can still throw challenges at you, but it's not necessarily it's not necessarily the same type of interesting play that people maybe start out was expecting. And but people still. Here's the thing. I think players, when they read their rulebooks the first time, they really, really respond to that aspirational idea of, I'm going to get to high level. I'm going to do all the high level things. I'm going to knock over all these silly NPCs that are taking up so much room in the lore chapter. Those are all things that people aspire about. Whereas the part of, those are things that people talk about when they're hyping up a game. Rarely, as discussed, is the fact that most campaigns get to like level 8 or 20 sessions in or whatever, and say, all right, we're either like someone has to leave, or schedules are changing, or they just said, all right, we've done enough. We beat that orc warlord. Let's just call it here. And therefore, there becomes the thing where people, again, are talking like they're going to be playing a campaign forever, but in reality, often they're not.
I mean, is that more of a homebrew thing, though? Because certainly, I mean, for me, maybe it's just that for the longest time, the games that I've been playing have been a campaign from campaign books, and it's like, right, we're going to play like my Warfare game. We'll do the starter box, but then the Enemy Within will be a couple of books out, and then we'll play through all the Enemy Within games. And it was always intended we played the Enemy Within, and that's that. And I guess, previous to that, the longest campaign I played in was probably Rise of the Rune Lords. And I was like, right, we'll play through that. And it's always that, no notion that after Rise of the Rune Lords, we'd go on to play a different game. So is it more of a homebrew thing, really? Or maybe D&D with its shorter books? I know certainly the first couple of D&D books were like, they were like, was the Horde of the Dragon Queen that was up to level
5 or something.
Yeah.
And then I think like the sequel one, I think technically went up to 12.
Horde of the Dragon Queen, yeah.
Yeah, like
not Horde, that's the first one.
There's been a few attempts to make higher level adventures in that vein. I know it certainly hasn't got as much hype as the endless debacles of WotC have. So, I feel like people have not played enough of that to really give it a breakdown of whether it's successful or not. But yeah, like a big epic campaign that has big epic campaign support, like as I say, your Pendragons or your Enemy Withins, that's all very well good, but that's very much it's a Pandemic legacy. It's this package of, this is our blob of content. We've worked on it for years to make sure that it is going to go from the beginning to the end. One hopes, at least. And at the end, you're going to be fully complete. People who have had their hero's journey and what have you. And if you really want to, here's like a paragraph at the end of the book saying, here's what you could do next if you really want to. But that's very much not the focus. That's just it really feels like it's just there to help the people who say, we're going to play this one game for the rest of our lives.
Yeah.
Even though in practical terms, that probably is not going to be what happens in the end. I mean, older editions of D&D had this aspiration of as you go up in level, you would have new mechanics or new experiences to things. First,
Main game. But
first edition and basic D&D attempted to have kind of stronghold gameplay where you build your castle and build an army, and you become this kind of political force in the world. And they'd have all kinds of stronghold rules and army rules and such, but those didn't really achieve.
They were probably largely ignored as they're ignored now. Certainly my Warframe player, who's a fairly high level knight, does not have an entire company of knights around with them because that derailed the entire game.
Yeah. The problem is that that's not enhancing the game that people want to play. It's adding on additional mini games, essentially. Is the problem? Is just like, well, I got into this to run around a dungeon stabbing goblins. Can I not just run around at level 37, dungeon stabbing level 37 goblins? Or I don't. Or it's rare that a system tries to make one of these like high level change of pace things that actually works with your core gameplay loop to keep it fresh, as opposed to trying to replace it or
Is that attempting to combat the staleness or maybe the lack of challenge that your players are high level, so either there's more and more bigger, badder guys, or else you change the nature of what the game is.
Yeah. I think that was an attempt, and it largely was not successful. People still were attached to their core gameplay loops, and they couldn't find a way to make these kinds of political or stronghold building systems fit in with the core gameplay to feel like it was adding on something as opposed to just being more craft. Then there's the other attempt where the game writers attempt to create bigger and bigger bad guys. There was old basic D&D eventually ended up with a higher level cap than advanced D&D because they created what was called the Immortals Handbook, which was an attempt to create like level 50. Here's how you become a god. Here's how you turn yourself into a dragon.
I guess that'd be the precursor to what we'd now know as like epic play. Level player handbook and stuff.
Yeah, and third edition also attempted with their epic level handbook, and
Pathfinder First Ed had a version as well. I don't recall the name of, but
yeah, and
Mythic, I think they call
it to an extent, yeah. And these were attempts to again create this sort of like endlessly escalating, gameplay loop. But that also kind of failed because it seemed like, okay, well, how many gods are attacking us this week? How many beetles the size of the moon have crawled out of the bowels of the earth, on the solstice this time?
That makes it a totally different thing, though. Which, I mean, does it even count as the same game anymore?
It mechanically it looks similar, but like there's a disconnect between what mechanics you're using and the scale of what's happening, and it starts to become a little bit ridiculous that you're dealing with this walking glacier with a nest of white dragons on its shoulders, the same way you dealt with a troll when you're level 3. Swing sword, apply fire.
If you stat something, players will often try and kill it.
Yeah, and
gods
players,
included.
Yeah, players are entitled to take swings at gods. I don't begrudge them that chance, but and certainly having a couple of like super high level bad guys as as aspiration material for your game, that's perfectly fine. But whenever they try to make this the core game of focus. So the point of the game is to get to level 36 and start the God of Energy ascension path, or gain mythic levels in Oracle, or whatever you.
But even with that, that's still going to put a finite bind up, because even like the epic game, that's what I'm saying. That that's what I'm familiar with. That went up to level 30.
Yeah,
and that was that. And even if you brought out a book beyond that, then okay, where do you go to level 40? Like, it's always going to have a bound. So I think anything that is any kind of progression, you're always going to have a bound.
I believe earlier in the year we were discussing longer campaigns in an episode, and if I recall correctly, what came up as well is that the campaign world could carry on even if the characters don't, in a kind of Ship of Theseus thing, where there was a party who conquered this dungeon and now they've made it into their fortress, and the second party is launching their expeditions out of that fortress, that sort of thing.
Mm.
That was one of the original things with Pathfinder Society, is the retirement arc was you basically becoming a member of the Decemvirate, like. So you become the bosses of the Pathfinder Society, and then your character's retired. Obviously, you've got other characters to play. So yeah, it's an interesting idea.
Yeah, but the Pathfinder Society cuts off at 10, doesn't it? Level 10?
It used to cut off at 12, and then you had a retirement arc that brought you up to like 14 and a half. And then
Right.
they did a handful of other games that went beyond that, but generally it was up to 12. The current second ed, there's not much beyond 8, I think.
Yeah, I do think that sort of that was the second point I was going to get to, is that you see now modern games, like a lot of the OSR games, they look exactly like original D&D, but they stop at level 10. They've basically done the math and saying, well, there's no point in putting a huge amount of effort into doing out stuff beyond level 10, because campaigns don't get there, and by the level 10, most people are feeling like super powered as they are. So why put big chunks? Why make a new separate rulebook with the Immortal Epic Handbook? Where you could just say focus on the play experience that people want, which is to get from level 1 where you're stabbing goblins to level 10.
It's certainly doing stuff with the Pathfinder Society. Like, if you're constantly running 5 to 8 games, what do you do when new players turn up? They're going to get thrown into a game that is a bit more complicated. They'll have abilities. They'll have a stack. They'll have like 2 or 3 pages of abilities and stuff rather than just a 1-pager. They're probably playing an NPC they're probably playing a pre-gen rather than playing their own character. It's just not as nice an experience for them to come up to. And okay, maybe you got the player base that you can have your 5 to 8 game going and your 1 to 4 game going, and that'd be fine. But you're not always going to have the players to be able to support that, if you make sure, and same with a campaign book, if you put out your campaign book for 5 to 8, assuming people are playing the same characters and they do their low level campaign, well, how many players are going to keep from the first game to go into the second game? Or, I mean, there's not really stopping you creating your characters at level 5, but I don't know, it's just more popular for people to go, right, I'll start at level 1.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's popular. It's like, I'd be shocked if it wasn't by far the most popular level to start games often.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's all kinds of reasons for that. I just wanted to finish off this piece by going, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with having like aspirations of, we're going to, do this for a long time. I'm going to invest in getting really good at this card game, or we're going to play through these 2 or 3 board games until we're masters of each of them, or we're going to play a campaign that goes to level 25, or what have you. I don't think these are bad things. I just think it is unrealistic to have that as your default assumption. And, maybe it's just, the mistakes of youth to think, oh, I'm going to, live forever, going to master every type of gaming. I know I certainly had those kinds of thoughts. of I'm going to be an RPG guy and a war games guy and a CCG guy and do all the board games. I am no longer that youthful sort, and I do not think I have time for all of those. Certainly not more than maybe 10 times of a given thing. But like, I don't think it's necessarily like a bad thing to aspire or put in the effort to try to run a long campaign or to things. I just have some realism.
It is hubris, My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look at my works, ye mighty in despair.
Yeah.
It's possible, but it's tricky. Like, even in a game where you don't have progression, players will accumulate resources even. And either you take away your players' toys and occasionally burn down their warehouse, which your party may get a little upset about, or they will, even if they're not accumulating physical stats power, they'll get a better ship, or they'll do this, and there will be a definite power increase. Unless you're keeping stuff, unless you're baselining stuff all the time, it's gonna happen. And players may not like constant grinding failure. If they're okay with easy come, easy go, then you could run, like in theory, you could run Twilight 2013 or Twilight 2000, one of the games, for quite a long time, as long as people don't. Then it's just a matter of like, do people get critically wounded and stuff and pick up long-term scars and long-term debility and injuries, or do they accumulate resources? Because increasing your stats is a lot of work and takes. So there's not as much. There is some progression, but very little. But then you have to worry about resource accumulation, which is, I guess, a similar problem. It's possible to do a long-term thing, but really, I think we need to be kind of realistic about it and go, right, we need to put a finite bound on stuff and on play. And, even if it is your favorite board game, maybe you want to mix it up a bit. Because even if you don't play that game all of the time, you may dust it off and come back to it.
Yeah. And again, I don't think there's anything wrong with having a plan. Oh, we're going to plan to play through all the Pandemic Legacies, or we're going to plan to, do 100 games of Small World for whatever reason. There's nothing wrong with planning, but just be aware that no plan will survive contact with real life.
And check in with everybody, because just because you're still loving that 99th game of Small World doesn't mean that everybody else on the table is into it. Chances are somebody else on the table is sick to death of Small World.
Yeah. And, embrace the new. Like, it's really nice, for you see someone's face light up when they see something new and they're saying, "Oh, I can do this, I can do that, I can do that." But like, isn't it better to be, get that new game smell more regularly than to just try to force yourself to play the same game forever? I don't know.
Yeah,
They're never going to force me to buy those new D&D books.
But look, there are plenty of other RPGs out there.
Yeah,
with fresh new book smell.
I mean, getting emails about that definitive edition of Ars Magica.
Yeah, there is. Another episode maybe we can discuss the whole capitalism model of are we being pushed to constantly buy new things? Short answer, yes. But that's
tune in for
more biting commentary on modern life. But I think we've made something like a point. Yeah, like, it's nice to dream, but at the same time, it's nice to be aware of your limits and the limits of your games. Well, if you'd like to make a 10-year commitment to being our audience, you can hit us up on our social media, subscribe to our YouTube channel, or join our Discord. Links for all those should be in our show notes. But for now, this party is over for now, but we have plans to do this for 100 years.
Thank you for listening to The Adventuring Party. Join us on our Discord server, where we keep the party going after hours. Otherwise, you can find us on Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, Twitter, or you can email the hosts at party@theadventuringparty.net. The Adventuring Party is released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike version 3 license. But you probably knew that already. We hope you enjoyed the episode, and look forward to seeing you back here next week. Goodbye.